Hey guys, welcome back to the Brik House. Cleo Bricktra here, and today we got the Pokémon Unite Toxic tier list. So I'm sure like myself, you've all played with some toxic players. They come in all different shapes and sizes, and I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through 15 of the most common toxic players that you're going to be running into of your Pokémon Unite games, and make them from pure toxicity to the barely toxic. So if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the Brik House. And without further ado, let's get right into the tier list. Alright, so let's start things off with the solo pusher. So the solo pusher is the toxic player who refuses to rotate, pushes one lane, and as an added bonus, they do love to blame the rest of the team when things go wrong, usually just by bragging about the amount of points they scored. It's definitely one of those actions when done maliciously can just give your team an incredibly tough time, as you're essentially just fighting a 5v4 for the whole game, and one that I have to put up pretty high in our toxic behavior tier. So next we have the chat spammer, referring to the person who likes to spam nice job or thanks after a team fight, and honestly it's just really good tilt fuel for the rest of your team. It's best done when someone makes a very small mistake and you just highlight on that mistake and try to make them feel bad about it. It's something that definitely promotes your team to actually play worse, as they probably don't want to help you out that much anymore and go as far as even to try and avoid you for the rest of the game. So definitely a fairly toxic behavior. I think it's slightly less toxic than the solo pusher, as the solution for the chat spammer for a lot of the time is just mute that guy. They usually have nothing good to say anyways. So next we have the jungle / goal stealer. So this is one of the more passive aggressive forms of toxic behavior, referring to someone who just kind of goes into the jungle farm and starts auto attacking those minions, making that XP get split between the both of you, or even like going and scoring on a goal zone intentionally, making sure that you can't get any stacks off or even get any extra points for the team. Definitely one of those very highly toxic behaviors that will set you behind so dramatically in a game, and is an easy S tier for the pure toxicity. So next we have the mute only player, just mutes everybody at the beginning of the game and is not able to see any pings or any shot calls that are going to be going on during the game. They could end up being extremely good and it not really matter, although there's other times where it's always the part where it matters the most and you need to get them to coordinate to do something, although they don't see your pings, and you can end up losing your game because of that. So definitely going to go in a barely toxic tier. It's not really a toxic act, it's more so of a preferred playstyle that some players have, although it does have its adverse side effects for the rest of your team. So next up, in the similar vein, we have the over apologizer, which will also go into the barely toxic tier. So this is really refers to the player who just constantly apologizes and self-doubts over every small mistake that they make, and it's not really something that's going to tilt you, and for the most part, just a completely harmless act. So next up, we have the tilted thrower, who, this is referring to the player that starts off fairly good in the game, although something happens, either they get KO'd or an objective gets given up, and they just kind of give up emotionally in that game. They stop trying to win the game, not necessarily feed the other team, and it's an act that gets very demoralizing for the rest of your team, and can honestly make them play a lot worse as well. It's one of those acts, for the most part, is accidental, as it requires just a little bit of introspection and just slowing down through the game, just playing at your own pace, and it's going to be falling in our toxic by accident tier. So next up we have the meta warrior. Now the meta warrior is someone who always trash talks the non-meta picks while only playing meta picks themselves. It's just something that can stifle some variety and experimentation within the community on different builds and Pokemon playstyles. For the most part, is something that is done accidentally, as you do want to promote the most meta option, although that side effect being that you're pushing people out of the experimentation for a game that does also invite a lot of experimentation, is an accidental drawback. So we're going to be throwing that in our toxic by accident tier. Next we got the backseat driver. So the backseat driver is someone who just kind of tells you what to do, usually through pings on the map, and the kicker about the backseat driver is that they typically underperform themselves. Now they can sometimes make good calls, although the way that they're doing so makes it so it's very hard to give them any sort of acknowledgement over the good call, and it's definitely one of those acts that is very passive aggressive in nature and is going to go into a passive toxicity tier. There's always this air of, well, I know how to do better. Although for the most part, this player is just doing just as good, if not a little bit worse than you. So next up we have the blame team toxic behavior. And this refers to the player that just typically casts the first stone no matter what the situation is in the game. This especially happens when there's a 1v1 going on and they ended up losing it. So the first thing they do is blame it on the fact that they didn't get an early gank from the jungle. And another kicker about this player is that they just never really reviewed any mistakes that they make, such as overextending or passive playing. And it's something that can actually be fairly passive for the most part. There are a fair share amount of times where it's a player being toxic, although for the most part it's someone who doesn't really just review any of the mistakes that they make and is first to just blame their team for anything that goes wrong. So next we have the intentional feeder, and when you have the intentional feeder on your team, that makes the game nearly impossible to win. The worst part about the person who's feeding is that they usually believe that their team is just worse than them and that everything is beneath them. And when you play with some intentional feeders, it's really weird because they act as if you caused them to play this way, which is just very odd to get your head around sometimes, and is definitely one of those acts that is just pure toxicity and 100% going to be going to the top of our tier list for right now. So next we got the highlight hunter, and this is the player that just plays the game fishing for clips. You'll see them waiting in the bush for a team fight, and instead of going in, they'll wait for the whole team to die so they can get kind of like a 1v5 clip going on, or wait in the bushes and wait to get a really big objective steal instead of helping out with a team fight going on nearby. The highlight hunter is someone who's very fun to watch, although when you have to play a game with a highlight hunter, it can get a bit annoying as you're trying to group up and get objectives done, although they have a completely different objective in mind. So one of those acts I'm going to put into the passive toxicity is not exactly an intentional form of toxicity, although the fact that they have a completely different goal in mind than the rest of the team can make it extremely annoying to play with. So next we have the sarcasm spammer. Now this is essentially like the mini version of the chat spammer. A lot of the times they're just trying to be funny, although it's just kind of coming out as flat for the most part. You'll see this most often as a thanks ping when they get KO'd, and just has this unintentional effect of just tilting other people on your team, or even having you get muted so other shot calls that you might make out in the future just get ignored by your team. So one I'm going to put in the toxic by accident category, and I think we'll just put it right in the middle above the meta warrior. So next up we have the distracted streamer, toxic behavior. This is when you have a streamer that is clearly distracted by chat and ends up missing a goal zone or runs like right past an enemy Pokemon because they're just looking down. It can cause a lot of confusion for your team and can lead to very simple mistakes that can start tilting your team pretty hard, especially if they're not in the know. Although for the streamer, you do get a lot of bonus points if you just blame every loss on the fact that your chat is distracting you. Because therefore then it's also a really good excuse, but that's another tier list. Anyways, we'll put that at the very bottom of the barely toxic category because my totally unbiased opinion, it has to be the least toxic behavior you can pull off. Again, completely unbiased. So next up we got the rage quitter. And this is the absolute morale destroyer that you can have on your team. It usually happens when something goes wrong, especially if it's very small. Bonus points if this happens earlier on in the game because, as I said before, it's a complete morale destroyer and can just make your team play a lot worse than what they would have otherwise. The worst version of the rage quitter is also the player that doesn't actually leave the game, but just starts sitting in the base trying to get past the auto detection system, as you really are just playing the game with one hand tied behind your back at that point. I don't think anything gets more infuriating than the rage quitter. As impossible as some of these intentional feeding games are to win, the tilt factor and pure toxicity that the effect that rage quitting has is just easily going to be our number one slot for the toxic tier list. So that leaves one more, which is the AFK farmer. This is someone who's technically not trolling you, but they're just completely useless for the entire game. They're different from the solo pusher as they're not trying to get any objectives done. They're just going to farm and then backing off and not participating with the team for anything else. And a lot of the times they'll use the pings to say, oh, I need to get my Unite move up, and then immediately use their Unite move to start farming again, which is just a complete misuse of that. So definitely a toxic behavior, and one that is also usually a result of when something doesn't go their way early game. They just kind of shut the team off and really just focus on doing whatever they want to do and not what the team needs to do. So we'll put that just at the bottom of our toxic behavior tier. Let's move that around too. And so that's gonna do it for the toxic tier list. We got rage quitting at the top of the S tier. I feel like it's a no-brainer. I don't think anything can get more infuriating than when someone just kind of picks up and leaves, or even worse, just hangs around and looking over the benches, knowing full well that they should be there, part of the action. Nothing can get more demoralizing for the rest of your team. And at the bottom, we got my totally unbiased opinion, the distracted streamer. By the way, we do stream every day. Definitely not a toxic act, and it is also 100% the chat's fault for why any mistakes might happen and not the distracted streamer. So it's not my fault I got into an accident. My friend sent me a funny meme. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this week. Let me know down in the comments, do you agree with these placements? Do you think something should be placed somewhere else? Don't forget to like and subscribe to support the Brik House. I've been Cleo Briktra, and until next time guys, stay nasty.